Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. Last year, our company TechServe Solutions went through a restructuring in 2023. You know how it goes, fire people and give more work to those left behind while paying us peanuts. We're a small outfit with less than 200 employees, desperately trying to hold on to our government customers while giants like Amazon Web Services are breathing down our necks. Give it 5 years and they'll probably replace us. But for now, the government clients love us because we're specialized and treat them better than the big contractors who couldn't care less. They axed 30 people from my team of 50. So now 20 of us are doing the work of 50 at the same salary. We're paid monthly, not hourly, and we don't get sales bonuses. Remember that, it's important later. I'm Sarah, and I've always been meticulous. I spend hours on each contract, even the ones worth just a few $1,000s. The government's vendor selection process moves at a snail's pace, and they're about as risk-averse as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. But here's the thing, those small contracts, they often balloon into 8 or 9-figure deals if everything goes smoothly. Since the layoffs, I've been drowning in work, and contracts were piling up faster than dirty laundry. Our sales director, let's call him Brad, couldn't stand me. I was slow and I kept catching the sales team's tricks. You know, over-promising to customers or pulling shady moves. The government clients adored me, though. I was honest about our capabilities and our shortcomings, which drove Brad up the wall. He thought I was tanking sales, but most of my clients had been with us for over a decade. Here's an example of how Brad and I butted heads. The sales team wanted to sell outdated Dell laptops to a school district, even though the entire state was moving towards cheaper Chromebooks. Schools are always tight on cash, and whatever they buy needs to last at least 5 years. But the sales team was trying to offload expensive, useless stuff to get better bonuses. They even wanted to charge the district nearly $1 million for IT support on ancient hardware. When I talked to the school district, I shared examples of state governments in the Northeast buying Chromebooks and saving money while future-proofing their hardware. My job was to get the best deal for the customer and build trust for a long-term contract. The district ended up buying Chromebooks, which were 40% cheaper and needed less than 20% of the previously quoted IT support cost. The sales team lost out on their bonus, but we locked in a 5-year contract with a happy customer. Brad was fuming. He pulled me into a meeting with our manager, Alex. Brad, Sarah, you're working on small contracts at a snail's pace. It's unacceptable. Alex just stood there, not bothering to defend me. Why don't you follow what Brad says and stop fussing over small contracts? I tried to explain, small contracts turn into big ones. We need to pay attention to them. Mistakes in small contracts could harm us if they grow. Besides, I'm struggling because you gave me the workload of 3 or 4 people. Brad exploded. You don't understand contracts. I've been doing this for 5 years. I make more in a month than you do in a year, so you should listen to me and not question me. That stung. Here I am, living in a shared apartment, barely making ends meet, while Brad's driving a fancy car and whining and dining government employees. I took a deep breath and said, Brad, could you send me an email with your suggestions to improve my work? He sneered. Can't you even remember what I just said in the meeting? But he complied and sent an email saying, do not review contracts less than $100,000 and trust the sales team that due diligence has been done, I replied, copying Alex. This could create liability in the future. Can you confirm again that the sales team will handle financial and legal compliance for small contracts, and that I should stop reviewing government contracts below $100,000 with no exceptions unless told otherwise? Bingo. I had it in writing. Cue malicious compliance. Instead of 2 hours, I started spending 10 minutes on small contracts. My backlog cleared up and I was home by 6:30 p.m. every day. Then a $10,000 contract came through. I spotted some issues. It mentioned offering 30% rebates to our software providers, something we'd stopped doing 5 years ago. We now only offer 5 to 10% rebates. Plus, I knew this government client had recently gotten a massive budget increase and was on a spending spree. There was a good chance this $10,000 customer could become a $100 million one, and that 30% rebate would mean giving away $30 million on top of our usual costs. But I remembered Brad's words. Stop fussing over small contracts. So, 10 minutes later, I emailed, no issues detected based on compliance check by the sales team. Government contracts move slowly, so nobody raised a fuss about the 30% rebate for months. Then, 10 months later, the state government customer said they wanted to work with us on a new $50 million contract with at least the same terms as before. This was the biggest contract in our company's history. Brad was over the moon. He gave the client a handshake deal promising the same or better terms. The government can legally just buy more on their current contract, so Brad had no qualms about promising the same terms. Given the size of the contract, everyone from legal, IT, and finance got involved. For 3 months, the entire company was focused on this one deal. The sales team was giddy, dreaming of million-dollar bonuses. Remember, I don't get sales bonuses to ensure I protect both the customers and the company. When the finance team finished their review, they dropped a bombshell. The company was going to lose $8 million and not make a dime. Everyone was shocked. Brad had made a deal without checking with us, and we couldn't back out now. Changing contract terms is a big no-no with the government, and they had legal contracts stating nothing will change. We were legally obligated to offer the government the same terms for 3 years. The legal team said we had to take the hit on our balance sheet and swallow the losses. Our CEO, Janet, called a big meeting in our fanciest conference room, complete with big TV screens. Every department head, manager, and person involved in this contract was summoned. It was time to find a scapegoat. Brad had to explain to his team why they wouldn't get bonuses on this massive contract they'd spent over 3 months on. When legal and finance shared their findings about the 30% rebate clause, Brad lost it. He pointed at me in front of everyone and yelled, "Pack your stuff, Sarah! You're terrible at your job, despite your so-called 100% customer satisfaction." I calmly opened my laptop, connected it to the display, and pulled up Brad's email on the big TV screens. While all 30 people read the email, I waited for Brad's reaction. Brad's face turned white when he realized he'd screwed up. He started sputtering, trying to find another scapegoat, even making racist comments about our IT consultants in Vietnam. He completely lost it. Janet cut him off. "That's enough, Brad. Sarah, can you explain what happened?" I nodded and said, "I followed Brad's instructions to the letter. He told me not to review small contracts and to trust that the sales team had done their due diligence. I have it in writing here." The room fell silent as everyone processed what had just happened. Aftermath. After that disastrous meeting, I was told to spend 2-3 hours on each contract, no matter the size. The company finally realized it's cheaper to hire 20 people like me and pay us $70,000 a year than to take big losses on contracts. Our team now has 40 members, still less than before, but enough to handle the workload. Because of the losses, Brad had to pay back his previous year's bonus due to a clawback clause in his contract. He ended up owing the company nearly $300,000 and was fired. Present day. We just heard that Brad lost his wrongful termination lawsuit against the company. Now he owes us another $200,000 in legal fees, bringing his total debt to over $500,000. Update 1. You might wonder why I'm still doing this job that pays less than state wages when I could probably make more elsewhere. I help government customers buy good stuff from various hardware and software companies so they don't overpay or rely on one big company. I feel proud when I can save tax dollars and help customers. During the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, many state governments went remote, holding local meetings on Zoom and trying to keep the government running while working from home. Budgets were frozen due to the economic shutdown and the COVID relief bill was months away. The sales team saw desperate government customers willing to sign anything just to get remote hardware and software. I saw this as extortion. Despite being an introvert who lacks the initiative to get promoted, I convinced our CEO, Janet, to offer free 60-day trials of expensive hardware and only charge for setup and transportation. It was a big risk, but we brought in an insurance company to offset any damages. I argued that this was our chance to show we're true partners with the government during an emergency. The sales team was furious for a month, but then they realized that all those free trial customers were calling us for paid contracts instead of going to companies 10 times our size that usually win contracts through lobbying or bribing government decision makers with expensive lunches or Super Bowl tickets. I can't disclose the exact government entities, but I can say that some agencies in New York and Florida were using our trial program during the first wave of COVID-19. I might change jobs soon, though. We only got a 3% salary increase this year, even though the company has nearly doubled its revenue in the past few years. Update 2. I just remembered another story that made the sales leaders hate me even more. This happened during the COVID wave when we were all working from home and getting used to Zoom. We had a telecom contract with the state government, and everyone joined a Zoom call to discuss it. The sales team wanted to increase this customer's monthly telecom bill from $60K to $300K. I objected, saying, "The increased calls during COVID don't justify such a big price hike. We should increase the bill to $100K a month. That's enough to cover costs and even improve our profit margin." The sales team laughed, and one of them said, "If the customer can pay more and is willing to pay more, why are you being so vocal?" Janet told me to keep quiet, and they proceeded with the $300K contract. I started working on other stuff and minimized the Zoom app. I don't usually end Zoom calls myself, as the meeting admin does that. Everyone said their goodbyes, and I naively assumed the call had ended. I vented my frustration, saying, "These salespeople are like wolves when the country is going through such a tough time." A few minutes later, a coworker sent me a chat message saying everyone had heard what I'd just said. No one complained or confronted me directly, but I knew I'd offended them. I want to add that not all sales team members are like this. Most of the new sales reps are eager to learn from everyone and focus on talking to customers rather than pushing products. However, new sales reps mostly handle small or low priority contracts. Any big contract automatically gets transferred to sales leadership. The next one is an entitled people's story. Let me tell you about the time this entitled homeowners association guy tried to claim part of my property as his own. It all started when I bought this nice piece of land on the outskirts of town. It was a big plot, about 5 acres, with a small house and a lot of undeveloped land around it. I loved how secluded and peaceful it was. About a year after I moved in, some developers started building a new subdivision next door. They put in a bunch of cookie-cutter houses and formed one of those homeowners associations to manage everything. I didn't pay much attention to it at first, since it didn't affect my property. But then this guy moved into one of the houses right on the edge of the subdivision closest to my land. I'll call him Kevin. From day one, Kevin acted like he owned the place. And I mean the whole neighborhood, not just his little lot. He got himself elected as president of the homeowners association and started bossing everyone around. One day I was out working in my garden when I saw Kevin marching across my field towards me. He had this sour look on his face like he'd just sucked on a lemon. "Hey there," I called out, trying to be friendly. "Can I help you with something?" Kevin planted himself in front of me and crossed his arms. "Yes, you can start by removing all this junk from the common area," he said, waving his hand at my garden. I was confused. What common area? This is my property." "No, this field is part of the homeowners association's land," Kevin insisted. "We're planning to put in a playground here for the neighborhood kids." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I'm sorry, but that's not correct. My property line extends all the way to that fence over there." I pointed to the boundary of the subdivision. "I have the deed to prove it." Kevin's face turned red. "Listen here. I'm the president of the homeowners association, and I'm telling you this land belongs to us now. You need to clear out or I'll have you removed for trespassing." I tried to stay calm. "Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Why don't we check the property records at the county office? That will clear things up." But Kevin wasn't interested in facts. He just kept ranting about homeowners association bylaws and threatening to call the police. I finally got fed up and told him to get off my land. "Fine, we'll do this the hard way," Kevin snarled. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed cop. I couldn't believe this guy was actually calling the cops on me for being on my own property. While we waited for them to arrive, Kevin paced back and forth, muttering to himself and glaring at me. I just shook my head and went back to tending my tomato plants. About 15 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers got out, and Kevin immediately rushed over to them. "Thank goodness you're here, officers," he exclaimed. "This man is trespassing on homeowners association property and refusing to leave. I want him arrested immediately." The older cop, who looked like he'd seen it all before, turned to me. "Sir, can you explain what's going on here?" I calmly laid out the situation. "Officer, I own this entire 5-acre property. It's my private land, not part of any homeowners association. This gentleman seems to be confused about where the property lines are." "Do you have any documentation to support that?" the cop asked. "Yes, sir, I have the deed and property survey inside. I'd be happy to show you," Kevin interrupted, waving a handful of papers. "I have the homeowners association bylaws right here. It clearly states that all open land belongs to the association." The officer held up his hand. "Sir, homeowners association bylaws don't override legal property deeds. Let's take a look at the actual documentation." We all went inside and I showed them my deed, property survey, and tax records. It was clear as day that I owned all 5 acres. Kevin's face got redder and redder as he realized he had no leg to stand on. The cops turned to Kevin. "Sir, this property does not belong to your homeowners association. You've been trespassing and harassing the rightful owner. I suggest you leave immediately before we have to take this any further." Kevin spluttered for a minute, then turned on his heel and stormed off without another word. The officers apologized for the trouble and headed out. I thought that would be the end of it, but Kevin wasn't done yet. Over the next few weeks, he tried everything he could think of to claim my land. He sent threatening letters from a so-called homeowners association lawyer, which turned out to be his cousin who'd once taken a legal class. He tried to get the city to condemn my property as blighted. He even sent some poor homeowners association members to start building that playground, but they quickly left when I explained the situation. Finally, I'd had enough. I hired a real lawyer and sent Kevin a cease and desist letter, warning him that any further harassment would result in a lawsuit. That seemed to finally get through to him. He never set foot on my property again. The whole thing was a huge hassle, but in the end, it actually worked out pretty well for me. All the neighbors who'd been suffering under Kevin's petty rules learned what had happened. They voted him out as Homeowners Association president and elected a much more reasonable person. And you know what? A few months later, some of those neighbors came to me with an interesting proposal. They wanted to dissolve the homeowners association entirely and just manage things informally as a neighborhood. They asked if I'd be willing to sell a small piece of my land at a very fair price to create a real community park that everyone could enjoy. After making sure all the legal I's were dotted and T's crossed, I agreed. Now, instead of Kevin's power trips, we have cookouts and events in the park. The whole neighborhood gets along great. Sometimes the craziest situations have a way of working out for the best. The next one is a petty revenge story. Hopefully this fits here. Used to live in a duplex with a double car park at the end of the driveway, one car spot for each resident. Anyway, neighbor had a friend over and decided they would take the spare spot next to the neighbor's car. I've come home after work to find someone in my car spot, so I did the only logical thing and parked directly behind them, blocking them from being able to reverse out of the tight driveway to go home. Content with my actions, I went inside and told the wife my only hope was that they needed to leave before I did the next morning. Sure enough, about 2 hours later, there was a soft knock at our door and a very sheepish man tried to explain he didn't realize it was my park and he was very sorry. He asked, could I please move my car? I said sure and moved so he could leave. Never saw him again. It was extremely satisfying. I only wish I'd have been outside to see his face when he realized he'd goofed. The next one is a malicious compliance story. For context, I just went into my old workplace and remembered this story. 5 years ago, I used to work for a large electronics store in Scandinavia. We sold everything from TVs to dishwashers. Being a physical store, we had a lot of display items and often sold them at a lower price when the product was discontinued. Please note that we rarely had the original packaging or manuals lying around. This will be important. This story takes place a late afternoon, about 30 minutes before closing. I worked this shift in the computer department and was asked to help at the camera section of the store as I was the go-to person for cameras. I was greeted by a couple, who I would guess were in their late 50s, and they were looking at one of the display models. I walked them through the camera's specs, let them test it out, and explained that while we had all the necessary accessories, the original manual and packaging were thrown away. They seemed perfectly fine with this, especially after I offered them a fantastic deal on the camera. We headed to the checkout where they paid, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. That is until the husband turned to me and asked, "Where's the manual?" I was thinking, oh shoot, maybe I didn't explain it well enough. I started to explain again, reiterating that we didn't have the original manual, but that it was easily accessible online. I had even included a link to the manual on their receipt. This was not taken well by the husband, who started raising his voice at me and said, "Online? I brought this product and I want the manual physically so I can read through it at home." Which I do understand, and tried explaining that I normally would print the manual. However, the manual for this particular camera was about 650 pages. Please note that they both are more than capable of looking up the manual, as I saw them browsing the web looking at reviews for the camera. The husband angrily started to berate me for about 5 minutes about how this wasn't a way to run a business and how he wouldn't leave without it. I tried explaining that the manual was 650 pages, how long that would take to print, and we were closing in around 10 minutes. But he was having none of it and he wouldn't leave without it. Now, I am normally a kind and respectful person and would do everything to fix a problem, but he was being disrespectful and I was paid by the hour anyway. So with my best customer service voice, I told him, "Sorry sir, of course the customer is always right," and started printing the 650 pages, while the husband looked smugged at me, probably feeling like he had won over the big man. But the thing was, the printers we had at the sales desk were only meant for printing receipts, so they couldn't print double-sided, and though they were relatively fast, they were not 650 pages fast and only held around 300 sheets of paper at a time. As the minutes ticked by, with each sheet of paper that emerged from the printer, the man's smug expression disappeared. His wife, who had initially seemed passive, began to look annoyed and a bit embarrassed. Then the printer ran out of paper, and you could see the relief in their eyes as they thought the printer was finally done, but that was quickly gone when they saw me coming with a huge stack of paper to fill it up. 20 minutes and 400 pages, and the wife started to look even more desperate, realizing that they were the only customers in a store that closed 10 minutes ago. The husband was beginning to realize his mistake, and nervously began to ask when it was done printing. I just smiled with my best customer service smile. We were about 2/3 of the way. He sighed and just continued to look at the mountain of paper that slowly got bigger and bigger. Another refill, and 200 pages later, the husband's defeat was evident. He finally asked if he could just take what had already been printed and leave. But by then, only like 50 pages remained. So I told him that we were almost done and I would hate if he left without the last pages in case he would miss something important. When the printer finally stopped, I handed him the entire 650-page manual, still smiling, and said, "Here you go. I hope you have a great day and enjoy the camera." They quickly left the store silent and defeated, and I never saw them again. Quick edit to clarify some things. I got paid 1.5 my wage plus afternoon add-on, so staying 30 minutes longer was actually a plus for me. I would have loved to say that the manual was in 6 different languages, but it wasn't. But the manual have so much info that is only relevant if you are a professional photographer, which they were not. Oh, and did I mention that I didn't put any staples or holes in the paper? Good luck keeping it together. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll